All right, so it is so great to see all of you guys. I am Trisha Allen. I am just finishing up my first year of service on the school board. We have several board members here with us tonight, most notably Barbara Wilson, who's the chair of the ACSD board. We also have interim superintendent Timothy Williams and our business manager, Matt Crenti. All who are here to help answer our questions and make sense of this big, huge, complicated thing that we are working through. So I am going to kick things off first to Barbara, who I believe is going to give us an overview of the budget materials that we have available to the public to help you work through the budget that we've put together. And then it'll be followed by a brief overview and a chance for you guys to ask any particular questions that you may have for us. So Barbara, if you want to take it away.
Thank you so much, Tricia. And I'd also like to welcome everyone here tonight. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to participate on this call and look forward to addressing any questions that you might have. What I'm going to do is share my screen and just show you the materials that are available on our website. In this particular case, instead of going to school board to access the budget materials, you just go under district to FY25 budget. And it helps when you click it. And so this is a special budget page that's been set up by the district, thanks to Emily, that basically identifies in one place, pulls together in one place, some resources for folks that will hopefully address questions that you might have of the budget, including access to the actual budget document itself. But looking here, there is the budget overview, and this is the link that Tricia put in the chat and Mary Heather put in the chat. So if you click on that, it brings up the actual budget overview flyer that has been put together. Okay, so now I need to close this. Sorry, guys. I'm not as good as this as I thought I was. Hold on, let me stop sharing because I can fix that. I needed to go to another page, sorry. It was hidden on me. And let me start over again. And there's also opportunities for public engagement. Obviously, this evening's Q&A session that we're doing today, and just a quick reminder of our full budget presentation that will be on the 27th. We also have a series of fiscal year 25 budget FAQs, and there is a form here that if you have questions later after tonight, after looking at materials, and you want to have a question answered, you can just fill that form out and someone will get back to you with an answer. And also included here is a link to the actual budget book itself. So hopefully this will, be a good resource for folks to really help pull everything together in one place as folks are trying to, get their arms around this year's budget. So I'm going to stop sharing now again. And with no further ado, what I would like to do is turn it over to Dr. Williams. And between him and Matt, they will lead the overview section for us.
Thank you, Barb. What I'd like to mention initially is that we're going to throw around some terminology that may not be familiar to a lot of people. When we say, for example, FY25, fiscal year 25, we're talking about the 2024-25 school year. We educators throw things around a lot that mean a lot to us, but don't mean something to anybody else. So I wanted to explain that ahead of time. And therefore, FY24 would refer to school year 23-24. So we use the fiscal year numbers, and we take the two-digit number from the second year of the school year. So if it's 2023-24, it's FY24. If it's 24-25, it's FY25. So I wanted to state that up front so that you don't have to ask what we're talking about because we tend to use some vernacular that's not common for people that people normally use. So for FY25, we face a lot of serious challenges for budget. You probably heard about Act 127 and its various incarnations. That presented a challenge. The current legislation as it stands right now, today, Thursday, is there's a 5% cap, which to qualify for the 5% cap, you had to keep spending down, per pupil spending down below 10%. So we had to make some cuts to do that because we wanted to try to retain all the ESSER positions, but realistically we could not with that kind of constriction. So we eliminated some non-instructional ESSER positions to get us where we needed to be to qualify for the 5% cap. So you may have heard that is about to change. The legislature has discovered that they don't have enough funding to cover that 5% cap mechanism. So they have to shift gears a little bit and have introduced or are going to introduce a change to that. That will force some districts to go back to their budgets and redo them. Fortunately for us, it won't require us to redo them because the cuts we made to qualify for the 5% cap are going to be enough to end up with the same kind of a budget and same kind of tax rate, or very, very similar tax rate to what we would have had under the 5% cap. Which means we did not pad the budget. We did not put extra things in the budget to take advantage of the 5% cap. We were just trying to get under the wire to qualify for the 5% cap. So other districts probably did add, well, I know for sure that some districts actually did add some things to their budget they would not have otherwise added because they had a delta that they could add things to the budget and still keep their tax rate at a reasonable level. And the legislature discovered that they went going a different route. So you probably will see changed legislation on that. It will not impact what we do here at Addison Central. So I wanted to preface this conversation that way to let you know that in spite of healthcare costs rising by 16%, loss of all the ESSER funding, increases in just about everything, and we have negotiations that are ongoing right now as well. All those things, and we managed to bring the budget into what we believe is a reasonable amount without cutting drastically to get to a manageable budget, manageable for the taxpayers. So with that, for a little bit more detail, I'd like to turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. It's a hard budget year. I think that one of the things that we've all been able to appreciate is how hard educational finance can be at the best of times. And I think that this year, having Act 127 implementation to navigate has made it, an order of magnitude harder. And now we're throwing that first set of rules out and about to have to sort of start over with our next set of rules. And so it complicates things even more. So I think, part of the reason for the outreach on behalf of the school board and for trying to do everything in our power to explain the process and the outcome of this budget year is really motivated by this feeling that it's hard for us. We want to simplify it however we can for people who are interested in learning more about it and make it as transparent and accessible as possible. So I think, as Dr. Williams alluded to, the budget's really it's a bridge. It's a level services budget that we're thinking of as a bridge from FY24, the current school year, to FY25 in a few different ways. It's going to help bridge us by providing continuity of services. So some of the ESSER-funded resources that were initially put in place to shore up learning loss in the wake of the pandemic will now be able to continue to FY25, where we begin implementation of the strategic plan, which is motivated by a move towards equity and towards addressing learning loss and shrinking the achievement gap. So those resources really do sort of transition from addressing one problem to supporting a new plan. It's also a bridge in leadership. And, we've got our next superintendent, Dr. Baker, starting and sort of phasing in over the course of the spring. So continuity, the more continuity, the better, I guess is what I'm saying. By keeping things as close to status quo as possible, we sort of optimize the transition and have hopefully the smoothest possible handoff over the summer. And then the last part of the bridge was to bypass the pitfall that Act 127 presented, which is the potential tax pitfall of the district tax rate going up by a substantial amount, 25 to 27%, because of the loss of tax capacity that our district is feeling. They have two mechanisms that they've rolled out to try to address the mitigation of pain felt by those recalibrations. And the first was the cap. We know that that's not going to work statewide. It was not feasible for the 5% property tax cap to generate enough property tax revenue to fund all the budgets. And so that's what's motivated this 11th hour switch to the transition mechanism, where instead of a 5% cap on property taxes, the state has decided that anyone who is advantaged by Act 127. And what does advantage mean? It means that every year a district can be considered to have a certain piece of the pie, a certain share of the overall ed fund statewide. What the state has asked us to do is to measure the difference in our size of the pie from this year, FY24, to next year, FY25, with the change being the result of the new weighting measures implemented under Act 127. That difference in pie share is the advantage or disadvantage that each district has to reckon with. For us, we're dealing with a 13% smaller piece of the pie, which is a 13% loss of taxing capacity. It's why funding the same budget that we had this year would cost that much more next year. We have all those additional drivers that Dr. Williams mentioned, but this is really that backdrop driver, that change in the structure of how funding is being doled out that has the biggest impact on us. So the state said anyone who's advantaged by any measure by the new weighting will not receive any kind of cap or discount. So that right off the bat led to a tremendous amount of savings, right? So there was going to be a cost associated with capping districts that were advantaged. That cost was recouped when they eliminated the cap. For districts that were disadvantaged by the change in weights under Act 127, they decided to do a discount system, which makes the district tax rate discount proportionate to the share of loss incurred by the district. So 1% of loss in the size of your pie piece equates to 1 cent discount on the EDTR, which is another one of those pieces of jargon that gets thrown around a lot. EDTR stands for Equalized District Tax Rate, and that's the only tax rate that the school district is responsible for. It's the result of dividing the per pupil spending, which is a function of what our spending plan is, divided by how many weighted pupils we have, by the property yield, which is the state's measure of the value of $1 of tax. By dividing those two things, you get the equalized district tax rate, which is the base rate that gets used for every town in our district because it's the byproduct of our school budget. In order to turn an EDTR tax rate into a town tax rate, there's one more step that has to go through, which is using the common level of appraisal, which is the CLA, to adjust the district tax rate to a town tax rate. The CLA has nothing to do with the school budget, and it is only a measure of each town's relative change in property values relative to their assessed property values over a 3-year average. We know for a fact that across the state, homes have appreciated tremendously over the last 3 years, which puts a lot of the town's assessments out of whack with what the actual market prices are suggesting. That results in historically low CLAs statewide, and is basically just a way of showing that property is worth more now. Now, normally in a year where CLAs were so low, the property yield, again, that's the state's calibration of how much a dollar of tax is worth, would be high, because they would be saying, yeah, all of these homes are now tremendously appreciated, so we're going to have a really high yield. That didn't happen this year, and it didn't happen because the yield was artificially suppressed by this enormous new spending brought on by the tax cap mechanism. When the state removes the tax cap, and we're hoping that that legislation passes so that we at least know what's going to happen here, but it is still hypothetical. If that happens, we will see the weight come off the yield caused by that additional spending, which will have the effect of raising the yield back up. We care about that because when we forecast what the yield could do under this scenario, we see that the yield will rise and approach $10,000. That's, again, calibration of $1 of tax pays for $100,000 of per pupil spending. Once it hits $10,000, and we're hoping it does, our budget is going to land exactly where it was when the school board approved it, which is at a 5% property tax rate increase to the EDTR. So everything that's happened and all of the tumultuousness with legislation kind of being proposed at the last minute, pushed through, and hopefully passed at the last minute, has kind of a boring overall effect for our district, which is that we just have to sit back and wait for hopefully enough to happen that we have no change. And so that's our forecast right now. That's sort of the overview of how we got to where we are today. And as I said in the beginning, this is a hard year, and education finance is hard at the best of times. And so with regards to the Q&A that we're doing tonight, I think it's important to point out that we can take questions on a variety of different fronts. People are wanting to get more background in Act 127 and what's going on there. We can talk about that. We can also talk about services and the content of the budget as it was developed, and anything in between. I think that it's really about just meeting people where they are and helping to answer questions where they arise.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for that overview. So, to recap so far, Barbara showed us all where the budget page was on the ACSD website. That has all the sort of supporting documents to help you guys work through this with us. Dr. Williams kind of gave a little bit of background about what's been happening lately, and Matt gave us a little more in-depth overview of what's going on. We would love to hear your questions and answer them to the best of our ability right now. So if you have any questions, you are welcome to either raise your hand or tap them into the chat, whichever may be easier for you. If you don't have any questions right now, then we have a few kind of general questions that we've brainstormed, we're happy to throw out there. But I want to give you guys first crack. And Chris, it looks like you're raising your hand real time. I love it.
I know. I actually forget where the hand. I haven't used the hand raise thing in a while. Where is that, by the way?
Oh, it's a good question.
It's fine. I'll find it. But as long as
you need to know for the future, it's if you go to reactions.
Okay.
That's where you'll find it, I think.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, from reactions.
Okay. Great. And sorry.
But putting your hand up, that worked too. So.
Okay. Yeah.
We're all good.
I'm sorry. I'm sure this is probably outlined in the materials, but what were the ESSER positions that were cut?
I can
unmute it. So.
Yeah. So we had 2 behavioral interventionist positions at MUMS that were repurposed into special education para positions that were available. The Dean of Climate and Culture position and the HHB coordinator position were sunset. We had a part-time ELL translation position that was sunset. That was able to be done because the employee was wanting to move towards a contract model. So that's going to be a contracted service next year, not a loss of service. And I think that's it. I can pull up a resource just to double check, but yeah, that's the gist.
Any other questions?
So I guess, can I follow up on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess, Matt, where does that, or whoever, where does that leave? Like, it sounds like there was some repurposing versus cutting. I guess my question, I'm not sure how to articulate it, but is sort of like, out of what was done, kind of like what percentage, I know you can't really quantify it that way, of those services are still in point of fact like going to be provided, if that makes sense. Like, it sounds like some of that's still going to be there for students, and I'm having a little trouble getting my head around how much of it is just gone versus kind of like still there but in a different form.
And,
yeah, no, I think that
go ahead.
the intent was to preserve as many of the services as possible. I think that if the current makeup of the staff presented an opportunity to sunset a position that we had under ESSER by placing somebody into a vacant position that was going to be sort of an equal fit. I'm thinking of the behavioral position now, where it's somebody who's working in that domain. It will be working in the same domain, similar services next year, with a position that just is in line with how the rest of the district is organized around that similar job description. Same thing with the translation services. The 2 that don't have sort of a direct analog within the outlook for next year would be the Dean of Climate and Culture position and the HHB coordinator.
And I might add, so like, if you looked at the total number of positions that were funded by ESSER, there were 6 positions, I believe, Tim, isn't that correct, that were actually cut? And so what was the goal, and the, kind of the direction that was used was to make sure that student services, those that are really interacting directly with students, would still be there. It may be that their title changes a little bit, as we go forward, but they would be an ACSD district-wide resource still, to really help continue with the work that they were doing, based on all the issues that we've had because of COVID and that kind of thing. Does that help?
It does, and I guess to that point, I think Matt, you may have said something, and I'm not sure. Sorry if I'm not interpreting correctly, but or maybe it was Tim, but that some of the ESSER funding from kind of like a federal perspective was there to help catch up from pandemic-related losses, and so I guess, and I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but is there a feeling that that's been achieved, or is it kind of more like, well, it hasn't been achieved, but the funding's going away, so we kind of have to do what we have to do?
Well, I think I don't think we're there yet, frankly. I don't think anybody is. And I think that was the main reason we tried to retain so many of those positions and fund them with the general fund, since the ESSER funding has gone away. If we were there, if we were where we need to be after following the pandemic, we probably would have been able to cut all of those positions. But we're not there, and neither are any other school district. It's a tough thing to rebound from. We're seeing behaviors that didn't exist prior to the pandemic. Well, they existed, but in much smaller numbers. So it's a different environment now. We're still trying to contend with that, still trying to do right by kids. And that's why I tried to maintain as many of those positions as we could. The ones that were easy to cut from there were the ones that had less face time with students. So that's the approach.
Want to qualify easy. I don't know that it was easy to cut any of these, but
Easier.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Because we would love to retain the HHB coordinator and those other things. That would be really helpful as we're dealing with the behaviors.
Yeah.
But we have to let go of something.
And does everybody know what that coordinator? Yeah, it's another acronym.
Yeah. Harassment, hazing, and bullying.
Mm-hmm.
To do investigations and that kind of thing and try to stem the tide.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, don't feel bad about asking questions. It's literally why we're here tonight.
Thank you.
No, of course. I just wanted to. I'm not sure who else is on. It looked like a relatively small list, but I didn't want to dominate.
It is a small list, and so if you have any more questions, please don't be shy about speaking up. Also, our other attendees, if you have any questions, we are here for you. In the meantime, Matt, did you want to talk a little bit about, we talked about the 13-cent discount because of our disadvantage, but did you want to talk a little bit about how that projects forward into the next few years as well?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Casey is right around the corner and is captivated by his favorite
By a board
Hi,
game?
Casey!
book reader's voice here. So, yeah, I think that with the 5% property tax cap, what that was going to do is going to take, let's say, a hypothetical actual tax rate of 25% and cap it at 5. So in year 1, taxpayers would only have to pay 5. In year 2, they'd have to pay another 5. In year 3, another 5 for 5 years. So what's that doing? It's stepping it down so that we're equalizing the actual tax rate to the discounted or capped tax rate in that model. With the new model, we are also going to have a tapering effect. The discount will shrink by 20% every year for 5 years. So a district that had a 15% loss of tax capacity would lose 3 cents of discount each year for 5 years, all the way down to zero. What that means is if spending is kept level, then by the end of year 5, the discounted rate would match the actual rate. Of course, you have to keep spending level in order to do that, but that's the plan. That's the taper.
So it's great that it isn't a one and done situation. We're not facing the cliff next year, but it is a reality that we're looking at less discount each year for the next 5 years. Yeah.
But the good news is that magic little property yield, as that goes up, then the total, that 1.76 that we were seeing with the 5% cap, it's going to be much more, much less. Right now, if in fact it gets down to the 10, up to the 10,000, we believe that it's going to be like $1.61 instead of $1.76. So even though you have to adjust to it go over time, there's less of a cliff, so to speak. It's something that's a little bit more manageable, and it'll be something that we can then work with the new superintendent on, and not hopefully be whacking programs and making major cuts, and we can really focus the budget on what we really need to do moving forward for our strategic plan. So, that yield makes such a big difference. And I can actually, if anyone was interested, I have a kind of a chart that I could show that shows what the different yields do to our tax rate. I don't need to do that, but if that's something you would like to see, I could pop it up on the screen.
I think it's interesting. Barb, you may as well put it up there.
Okay, so let me do that real quick. I have it, I think, handy here. Give me 2 seconds.
And I will chime in with what Matt was teaching us about the yield, that it is not actually set until all the budgets are actually voted on and good to go. So we don't know for sure the final yield until all the budgets are actually finalized and voted on by the districts. In the past, there's been a pretty good estimation of where the yield would be. This year, because everything's all crazy, it's more of a moving target. So that's why we have this handy dandy chart. Barb.
Yeah, thank you. And Matt can talk to this just as easy. It's his data, actually. I just stole it. So this really shows the difference of that cap, that estimated EDTR, the district tax rate was much, much higher, $1.76. And if you look at the different scenarios with the 13-cent discount, they all change based on what that yield is. Right now, they've already estimated that it's going to be at least $9,775. So to me, that's kind of if they change the law, that's our kind of worst case scenario. And of course, we would then see a discounted EDTR of $1.52. But as Matt indicated, we're hoping that it gets to 10,000, and maybe it'll get higher, right? So then this 148 looks a lot like the 147, but we don't have to dig out of this hole, right? Over the 5 years, there's a big difference between $1.48 to 161 versus $1.47 to 176. And so that's why, as scared as we were when we first heard about this change, once we started looking at the data, we're like, oh, please bring it on and get that yield up where it's supposed to be. Any questions on that? So I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. So again, the yield isn't anything that we have control over. That's a number that drastically affects our final tax rate. We have no control over it, and we aren't going to know what it is for sure until the vote is done.
Yeah. So I think the estimate, Matt, isn't it mid-April? When they hopefully, once they get all the new budgets and compile all the results. But Matt, tells us they promise to keep us updated every couple weeks, because it's so important for us.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about the yield is that, you know, whatever craziness happens and when the dust settles this year, you know, it is what it is. And then next year is a whole new ball game with the same set of rules, right? And so it's going to be curious to see how year 2 of this works. Are people going to continue to push spending to the extent that we get another low yield, or are people going to maybe take their foot off the spending gas pedal a little bit to try to bring their district tax rates level or down, and have, you know, a larger yield result? So I think you know, it's all speculation at this point, but those two things are really linked, and it goes to a lot of the spending strategy that districts employ when designing budgets. Now, if you think about drivers for a second, and you know, some of that additional spending that might have been placed into some of these budgets, a lot of it might have been capital improvements, or some of it at least was. Capital improvements is a statewide concern. It's, you know, we have crumbling infrastructure and you know, billions of dollars of need. So I think what's going to be interesting to me is, as the state rolls out its plan for a construction assistance grant program, which it's pretty close to being able to do, how that impacts districts' budgeting strategy to the capital improvements projects move to bonds. Does it make the budget skinnier? Does that have an effect of driving the yield up, and then the tax rates come down enough so that the bond, when it's put in, can fit in without raising the tax rate tremendously? All these things are connected, and it's going to be that's going to be the next roller coaster that we go on.
Never a dull moment.
So, Matt or Tim, what would you say? What do you want the takeaways from this Q&A to be?
Well, the takeaway for me is that whether Act 127 stays as it is, or whether it gets modified, and it's most likely to get modified, either way, we're running with the same budget, because what we have done fits nicely in both scenarios. So that's the takeaway. And yeah, taxes will go up, but from like fiscal year 24 is a tax rate of $1.40, and we're looking at $1.47, $1.48 for this tax rate for fiscal year 25. There is an outside chance the yield will come in high enough that the tax rate will be something close to
What it has been?
in fiscal year 24. If
$1.40.
it happens, you won't see a tax increase, and you won't see an increase in the tax rate. It is possible that can happen. I don't want to say it will happen. I'm optimistic that we'll get it something lower than $1.48.
So putting out good vibes for a high yield.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good vibes.
Yes.
Yeah. Matt, any takeaways that you're pushing for?
No, I think that there was this part of me that expected a tremendous audience of interested taxpayers here tonight, and obviously we've got a skinny crowd. I'm hoping that the video gets broadly circulated and everyone's well informed heading into town meeting day. But I think that to people who are watching this and have additional questions, just know that we've got resources and people that you can talk to get those answered and be well informed for voting.
Absolutely. Barb, any last words or last thoughts?
Oh, I just, it's been a roller coaster. It really has. But I have to say, I feel more hopeful at this point, especially with the potential of this new legislation passing, that in the long run, we're going to be in a better place than we would have. And so it has to pass, from what I understand, listening to the legislatures, because basically the yield was collapsing, right? There was not going to be anything left of our education fund, basically. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to pass. And now that I understand it, I'm happy that they made the change. I just wish they would have made the change back in December. I'm sorry, because it would have been just so much easier. The roller coaster is really hard and confusing as well to the community, and so that's really a frustration for me, that folks are not maybe getting the real story and not here tonight to hear the explanation. So definitely pass on to your friends that we'll have this video available, and if in fact folks look at our materials and our FAQs and have more questions, there's that little link there that they can submit those questions, so that we can address everybody's questions as best as we can.
All right. Before we finally wrap things up, any last questions? Going.
Chris, come on, you got another one.
You know me, I can ask questions all night, but I'm not going to.
Okay. All right. Well, then I would like to thank you guys for coming out, both those members of the board and the district, as well as the members of the public who came in today. I hope that this was helpful for you. And again, remember that we have all of those budget materials up on our website. Stephen, thanks for the round of applause.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought that was a hand raised.
No,
he was clapping.
Hey. So thank you guys very much for joining us tonight, and I hope that we get to speak with you more in the future.
And come to the meeting. Come to the meeting on the 27th.
Annual meeting, February 27th, 7 p.m. Band room of the high school. Yes. Band room of the high school. See you guys then.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night.
Right.